And I want to start by saying welcome to everyone to another Massmedic virtual program. We are absolutely thrilled to have you joining us for this signature event, the State of the Supply Chain and Manufacturing. So I'm Rachel Robinson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Massmedic, and I've been thrilled to be able to help not only put this program together, but interact with our speakers and our sponsors who we could not do this without. So it's been a really exciting time for me. So just a quick intro about Massmedic for those of you who are joining us for the first time or don't know about us. Massmedic is a 26-year-old organization. We are a trade association that represents medical technologies and health tech, mainly in New England. However, we represent companies all over the world. We focus our efforts around connection, advocacy, community, and education. If you would like to learn more and potentially are not a member or sponsor of any of our programs, you can do that at massmedic.com. And as I said, this is part of our signature series of virtual and in-person events. I'm happy to say we are back in person this year. The other pieces of our signature series events are our Women in MedTech program, which we run in person 4 times a year. Our FDA updates, which are hybrid programs this year. We did our first one in February, and we'll be doing another one in the fall. Our quarterly town hall, which focuses on government relations and affairs updates, and our annual MedTech Impact Gala, which takes place every July and is our signature in-person cocktail event. So with that, I would like to kick off today's program. We do have 3 pieces of the program today. The first discussion we're going to have is on diversifying your manufacturing and supply chains for success. And we're thrilled to have Fictive, Abiomed, and O'Malley advisors joining us for that. Our second session will be Seeing Green, the value of sustainability and ESG in your supply chain. And we're thrilled to have Capaccio Environmental Engineering, Thermo Fisher Scientific, Insulet, and Access Vascular joining us for that. And then we'll round out the program with an update on the state of contract design and manufacturing with Alira Health. I can't go any further without saying a big thank you to our sponsors for this program. Capaccio Environmental Engineering and Thermo Fisher Scientific are our series sponsors, and we could not do this without their continued partnership. So thank you for them. You're going to get to know a lot more about them as we go into the program, as they are wonderful enough to be 2 of our speakers in the second session. So from that perspective, we absolutely welcome questions. I would encourage you to use the Q&A options at the bottom of your screen. Also, from a logistics perspective, the program will be recorded and shared with everyone who registered after. So if you need to pop off and pop back on at any time, your links will work throughout the 3 hours. And if you miss anything, we will absolutely have a recording for you. So with that, before we kick off our first panel, I kind of wanted to set the stage a little bit for, everyone to kind of give you an idea of where we're looking at the state of manufacturing and supply chains right now. The way Massmedic has been working with our members, we kind of see bottlenecks are happening due to a variety of reasons, obviously, but kind of a few key ones to think about are logistics. So understanding how to get the things that people need to them when they need it at a price they can afford to pay. We're having some bottlenecking issues around stockpiling. So uncertainty about future availability is incentivizing additional short-term purchasing. This is affecting both small and large companies in different ways. And then obviously the workforce constraints. Labor shortages are manifesting both directly and indirectly. So I want to kick this panel off by asking each of our panelists to just quickly introduce yourself, talk a little bit about what your background is and what you're doing, and then we're going to jump into some of those key kind of discussion topics. So Todd, why don't you go first and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel, and thanks for having me. So my name is Todd Taylor. I currently work at a Silicon Valley tech company called Fictive, which I'll explain a little bit more about in a little bit. My background, you might be wondering why I'm at a Massmedic talk, living in California. I'm actually born and raised in the Brockton area. Did a mechanical engineering degree at Northeastern and spent 20 years or so working at product development firms in Massachusetts, namely Insight Product Development for about 10, and then Radius Product Development for about 10. Radius, some of you may be familiar with, as part of the Nipro ecosystem, and the Nipro ecosystem was absorbed by the Jabil ecosystem. So if you're not familiar with Jabil, $30 billion contract manufacturer, probably second, third, fourth biggest in the world. I think they may be the largest healthcare manufacturer in the world at this point. So lived there for 10 years and really have experience and insight into the intersection of new product development. So my expertise being from zero idea, like no idea what we're going to do yet, to want to launch something like EV, DV, PV, like ramp, and then into the Jabil-like ecosystem of mass manufacturing. So I've got kind of that spectrum, but heavily geared toward the front end of that. And so today I left those positions and moved on to Fictive, which is pretty mature Series E funded startup in San Francisco based. And what we are is a digitally connected ecosystem of suppliers via an intelligent platform to do, call it supply chain or sourcing or procurement of custom mechanical parts when you need a low volume, high mix of stuff. So MPD, ETO businesses use us a lot, engineer to order type business models. And then MRO, so maintenance, repair, operations. You know, I've got a line that went down, I need a part quickly. So I can get into the, bottlenecks, stockpiling, that type of stuff, but from the perspective of the MPD and the low volume space. I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Joanne, why don't you go next?
Sorry, I'm a VP of sales essentially at Fictive. I'm the guy that was a customer and knows the customer, so I help our team understand our customers. So, sorry, excuse me.
Okay, so I'm Joanne Mavroides. I'm the Director of Biz Development Integration at Abiomed. I've spent most of my career, in fact, last year when I was on this panel, I was Director of Supply Chain. So spent most of my career in either manufacturing or supply chain related items. Previous to coming to Abiomed, I was actually in electronics and telecommunications. So the last 5 years spent it is my first 5 years at med device companies. So I'm a chemical engineer by trade with an MBA and thoroughly love working both with internal as well as contract manufacturers over the last 30 years.
Marie, you're up.
Yeah, very good. Well, I'm Marie O'Malley. I am spent my career in med device and have worked at Medtronic for 27 years, primarily leading the sourcing organization for the cardiovascular business unit, always based in Massachusetts, but had a global team sourcing a variety of materials. So have had a lot of experience in global supply chain and supply management. I made a decision to leave Medtronic about a year ago in February and started my own consulting company, but then had joined a former colleague and now serving as their Vice President of Commercial Operations. Company is PISA USA. They have offices north of San Diego in the US and have set up contract manufacturing and ETO sterilization in Tijuana. So it's interesting for me, having always been on the OEM side, now being on the supplier side, but still very involved in supply management, supply chain issues. So excited about the discussion today.
That's awesome. I do love the variety of backgrounds that we have on the panel. So I'm just going to kick this off with some high-level questions for each of you, but please feel free to take them where they go. And again, questions from the audience are highly encouraged. But okay, so Todd, you talked a little bit about what Fictive is doing, and it seems like there is some opportunity with your platform to decrease some logistics bottlenecks, right? By obviously optimizing for capacity across manufacturing. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're seeing right now with new customers? Why are they using the platform? What is it doing? And how are they interacting?
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief. That's a complicated topic. So new product development, let's say in the world we're in, is custom mechanical parts, right? So as a mechanical engineer, I design a part that's going into my product or my test fixture or whatever it may be. Let's say it's a CNC part or injection molded part or whatever. Traditionally, in my career, we would spend our time with suppliers that we knew. So it could be a shop down the street, it could be the one you used on the last two projects, and you would go back there and go back to the well for more help with the folks that you know. if your group is working underneath a quality system with an AVL and, you know, the supplier onboarding process, et cetera, which hopefully you are, that could take a little time. As soon as something happens with that supplier, that's your best friend, right? They're too busy, they close because of COVID, there's a lot, who knows what, right? So what we've done is our interaction with Fictive is like interacting with about 300 suppliers, and they're all digitally connected on our platform. So an engineer, let's say, or a designer that's working in the new product development, they want to iterate quickly on their design. They come to us with that part rather than the person down the street, or they've already loaded up the person down the street and then have overflow or whatever it may be. And we're instantly matching that demand to open capacity and supply and capability. So the platform is smart enough to pair, this is what you need, this is a supplier that's capable and ready to take your order and start it that day or the next day. Has the material, has the machine, has the capability, et cetera, right? So if you think about that, well, when something like COVID happens and we're international, right? So we've got suppliers in the US, overseas, India, China. When lockdowns happened in China, we just pushed orders, rerouted orders to the US. And then when the ramp of lockdowns happened in the US and China started to open up, we did the opposite, right? Transparently, frankly, to our customer base. They can actually ask, I want this or I want that, that's fine. But if they just want their parts and they want it in 7 days, we just make the order happen, right? So that's a way to think about a way to alleviate bottlenecks with a diversified supply chain, right? Ironically, we're diversifying folks by just like working with us. So it's a model that helps both ends, I should say, I would say, meaning less paperwork on your AVL onboarding, et cetera, to deal with our company to N of one, and you get access to hundreds worth of capacity, capability, et cetera. And we take care of the routing, for lack of a better term. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And I guess I'm curious if there is pushback, right, on that from a person purchasing kind of perspective, right? I know people, I would imagine people like to be pretty OCD about their supply chain as much as they possibly can. So working with one group might be a little nerve-wracking as opposed to working with the groups they're used to. However, I do see that the paperwork would be a lot less. So how do people kind of manage that push and pull, and how do you manage that push and pull?
Yeah, there's a few ways. So I was one of those engineers. So I understand if you're stressed about getting your part, getting it done well and getting it on time, and you love the shop down the street, I tell them, great, use the shop down the street. For the ones you're concerned about, if you need to walk in on the floor and see it, send those there because you can't do that with us. But for the other stuff that's taking up your time out of your week, right? Productive time you should be spending designing, let's say, or testing something. And instead you're doing rounds of DFM emails, phone calls, trying to get a quote, waiting 2 weeks, et cetera. Get a quote from us in an hour or less, get the DFM feedback instantly, do that whole transaction in an hour or less than a half a day, kick it off and get your parts, and they'll be sitting in a box waiting for the rest of your stuff to be done, right? It's kind of the way I treat that typically. But our model is, you know, our ecosystem, our manufacturing partner network is our IP. We do not pair individual manufacturing partners with individual customers and introduce them to each other. So we are in between. The other interesting wrinkle to that is we are the supplier of record. So it's our price, our lead time, our quality. We will meet spec. The fact that we don't own any machines is we've sort of Uberized the model, call it, for this high mix, low volume custom mechanical world.
And one follow-up question that just came to mind, because I nerd out over liability concerns. How does liability play into all of that? I always love when our legal firms will do MedTech, liability programs. So are you taking on the responsibility of being as the supplier on record if something happens at the manufacturing organizations, or are the manufacturers still liable for that? And you guys are helping from a QA perspective, getting the initial parts?
Our contract with our customers just says, to the extent that we are liable, essentially we will meet spec.
Gotcha.
If we don't, we will make it right.
Okay. Well, I was just noticing too on your website and in the description you guys gave as well, How are you doing QA? Like, how are you doing you're doing article inspection, all
Yeah,
that kind of stuff?
That's probably a 20-minute discussion in and of itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me put it this way. We put an enormous amount of technological investment in the platform itself. And then we do not bid out the work to our network. We first, it's difficult to get on the network. So we recruit, or people want to sign on and then they have to pass a test. We audit them. We're looking at their quality standards. We're imposing our own on them. And we will put our individual supplier quality engineer boots on the ground in their shop. So not only is it the shop's QA QC, it's then another level of our QA QC before it goes to the customer. Ingestion of the spec on the customer side is obviously everything from like, I just want it fast, like whatever your standards are on platform is great. Next level is we will intake 2D prints and use AI and OCR to read the print and infuse the order with custom quality spec. And then the next level is you want to have a like hour-long, week-long conversation with our engineers about exactly what you want and how you want it. We can do that too. So it's,
Okay.
yeah, understanding spec and meeting spec. That's kind of how we handle it in the briefest description I can give.
So we did have a question come in. Oh, go ahead, Joanne. Yes.
And it's related to, and maybe it's related to the question that's there, but it's
Sorry,
more
missed that.
on the registered bodies, and is this really targeted at just the MPI environment?
Yes.
Okay, so there's
Medical. So I come from a 1345 world. We are not 1345.
got it. Okay.
So very, very large healthcare companies use us like day to day, and then
Just initial.
I want to get to market. Time to market matters. Where we're helping them make money is accelerating that process. The handoff to the organizations like you guys deal with, Jabil, et cetera. We will help facilitate. Here's what we learned along the way, but we're not going to be the supplier of record for.
That was my next question, was how do you support the transition to who needs it?
As you might imagine, I can't reveal too much here, but the mass manufacturing suppliers have relationships with us as well, because we're a funnel. We're seeding a lot of that into their world, and it's coming the other direction too. Folks are showing up there with things that aren't ready for prime time, and they're kicking it to us. Does that make sense? I have to stay vague there, but you kind of have a picture, I hope, what that one might look like. It's symbiotic.
Awesome. Thank you. I know I threw some toughy ones at you there.
I'm here for, right?
Yeah. Marie, can you talk a little bit about what you've seen, obviously having worked with large organizations and now, working with smaller organizations? Stockpiling is an issue that has cost both to the organization undertaking it and the industry more broadly. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen this manifest in different kinds of organizations?
Yeah, I think initially, people hear about shortages of various commodities and, get nervous. So want to secure a year's supply, but that creates a whole bunch of issues for everybody in, our industry. So, I think suppliers are trying to do the right thing by, asking customers what their historical demands are and, managing allocations that way. Rather than stockpiling, I think you got to make sure you're, satisfying your needs, making sure you can service the patients, and that, real demand versus building up buffer inventory. And I think the other thing that's happened too is just, companies that did have single sources, the business continuity really came into play, and making sure you had multiple sources, because there has been some real shortages, and you want to make sure you can keep your production operational and secure, whatever it is, Tyvek, chips, and, Rachel, you also mentioned at the beginning, some of the lead time issues. You got to plan ahead, because logistics can be a lot longer, and, not just the logistics side of it, but I think everyone's experiencing, tremendous increases in lead times, parts that you were able to get consistently within a few weeks or, as needed now have tremendous lead times. And I know companies have had to get a lot better at forecasting and really understanding what the requirements were. I think the days of being able to just ad hoc order things are gone. So it requires a different level of sophistication in understanding your whole demand planning and how that relates to the materials, so that, if there are things that have a year lead time, so you have to be able to forecast that appropriately. But, yeah, unfortunately, there is some stockpiling. I think suppliers try to stop that because they're trying to service the industry and they're trying to service all their customers. So I think just, really understanding what your requirements are is probably a better solution than just trying to stockpile.
Do you think that's easier so when it comes to forecasting, is that easier for large companies to do with a history of manufacturing than small companies, or is it actually harder because there's so many pieces in the chain as a large organization?
I think if you have a mature commercial product, it's easier. I think whether you're a small or a large company, I think it's the new products that you don't really know what the, market acceptance and customer demand is going to be. So, even large companies had a challenge forecasting what the demand is going to be. So, really, working with your sales and marketing team and understanding that and tracking performance as you're launching products so that you can adjust accordingly. And I think the other thing that's important too is just having a really good relationship with your suppliers and having that ongoing communication so that you can partner together with them and, make sure you can meet your needs.
I think it's really interesting because, that seems like it does, directly affect both, like, as you said, large and small companies. So working with marketing, working with sales, how do you start to do that though for a product that's just about to launch, or is still, if you're in the, the early stages, you have no idea, kind of how this product is going to take off. How can you begin to do that? Any tips on that?
I think it goes back to, you're going to have a business plan and a strategy for that launch. So it's going to be, the involvement of, again, going back to your sales and marketing, the executive team of, they have some model and expectation of how that product is going to perform in the market. So, and if it's early on, you continue to modify that on a pretty frequent basis.
It also seems like there's a power dynamic at play that's kind of shifted a little bit, right? Whereas the purchasers, I would imagine, always have a bit more leverage than those that are supplying the good, but now it seems to have shifted a little bit because everybody wants the same kinds of things and there's less people supplying it. How can you kind of manage those dynamics, and do you think they'll shift back, or am I completely wrong on the shift?
No, I think you're right. I think there has been a shift, and I think that the procurement team really is, their days of kind of pounding their fists on the table and wanting price decreases. It's more about being able to secure supply, and I think people that have been doing it for a long time, and I see Joanne, she knows this. I mean, having really good relationships with the suppliers that, they know and respect you and you have a good mutual relationship, they're going to be willing to help you. I think it's shifted a little bit, but I think everybody is really trying to make sure we can, service the market and the patients, given that we are in the med device industry.
Joanne, do you want to comment on that at all?
No, I totally agree. That's why you develop your relationships in the good times so that you have them when you're in the bad times.
So, I think what we've heard from, a number of small companies as well is that as they're trying to establish those relationships, the bigger orders always get more priority. So their lead times are getting pushed even more. But as you said, it's about servicing the entire industry. Any kind of tips for starting off developing those relationships, especially in this kind of life cycle right now where we are in this environment? New products have to get to market, right? Nothing is changing because supply chain is drying up. Companies are still launching new products. So, pulling your collective experiences, any thoughts on how to start establishing those in more of a cutthroat scenario?
Marie, do you want me to start, or I can?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I think a couple of things. One is starts right with, who do you go to, right? If you're just saying, hey, I need this new widget, and we're assuming we're kind of past the NPI stage here for a second, Todd, but I think that one of the things that Abiomed's done over the years is identify not necessarily the biggest, lowest cost supplier of something, but really finding that right niche of those, not necessarily tiny, but maybe small to medium sized companies that you can really get in and make that really strong relationship, even as, Abiomed's grown tremendously in the past 5 years, right? But even if those suppliers, if you invest in them and they invest in you, then those relationships just grow over time. And as you grow, they can grow. And if they can buy into that model, then there's something in it for them as well. And I think that that's going not necessarily to the same supplier that everybody goes to is a way to be able to find your niche and develop that initial relationship. And then as your volumes go crazy, you need to add additional suppliers you can maybe look at for the lower cost and some of the bigger players. But I think that that's a technique that even before I came to Abiomed that Abiomed was using, and I think that it's served us well over the past couple of years of craziness.
Yeah, and I think trying to shift your relationship out of a purely transactional relationship to, as Joanne mentioned, share kind of that, vision and what is the technology. So they're excited about the future too. So that, you both have a vested interest in the technology, which, a lot of times it's, impressive, all the devices and therapies that are being, innovated, and to share some of that information really makes that relationship a true partnership. And, they're kind of vested in it too, because at the end of the day, they're helping patients. So I think they like that as opposed to just supplying a widget.
Yeah. In fact, one of the things when we have our business reviews or when we go to meet a new supplier, one of the very first things we do is we play one of our patient stories off the Abiomed website. It's just, it starts that engagement right in the beginning and helps them be part of the team.
That's really interesting. I had not heard anyone say that before, but I love actually trying to get them to buy into your mission, because you're selling them as much as they're selling you, right? You're trying to get that, it's such a relationship. How much redundancy, Todd, we talked about people kind of coming on to shore up the efforts that they have. How much redundancy, talk about how many people you think are joining to add, a layer of redundancy to their supply chain. And then Joanna Marie, I'd love your thoughts on how much redundancy you think people need now versus even a year ago.
Yeah, I'll take that first. So the quick answer is, what's really, I just was noticing this in the past couple of weeks with our interactions with some of our biggest customers, some of which are trying to add redundancy and some of which are trying to rationalize their supply chain. And we've actually been the answer for both. If you think about it, they want redundancy, meaning, N of one node with us equals hundreds, let's say, maybe tens, depending on the capability or technology. On the flip side, they've got a long tail of, in some cases, thousands, but let's say hundreds of suppliers that are the dribs and drabs of the things that they need that are lower volume. They're actually bringing that to us to rationalize and collapse that, go from 500 down to 20 or whatever they want to do, right? And back to the conversation about being a strategic partner, that's what we're partnering with them on. It's saying you can have confidence that we'll take that long tail and shrink it down to this amount, assuming again that our business model meets the need for what they're doing. So in the medical world, it might be MRO, it might be a manufacturing line where people don't want to stockpile spare parts. They want to use an on-demand service like ourselves. So rather than stock 20, stock 4, and then use those 4. And when you need 4 more, come to us and we'll have them to you in 7 days, right? Rather than wait 3 months or whatever it might be for the part. So take the cash off the shelf essentially and use us. But you can actually think of our model both ways, which I find really fascinating, both rationalization and redundancy at the same time.
Joanne Marie, I will defer to you for what do you think people should have?
Go ahead, Marie.
I think, it's hard to have dual sourcing in med device just because of the qualification validation process. But I do think, everyone has gone through all the national disasters that we've had, natural disasters, I was going to say. And, now with the pandemic, it even put a finer point on the need to have business continuity. So I don't think it's practical to have, continuity of backup sources for every component, but I think there are some long lead time, hard to source, long qualification processes that, you know, your business is going to be dependent on. So, you know, it would be irresponsible not to do that. So I think even if it's within the same supplier and you have, you know, backup facilities, or, you know, having multiple sources. It is sometimes hard in med device because our volumes aren't as great as other industries to have multiple sources. But, you know, if it's a critical component or it's going to be really, you know, it's essential for your product, I think you have an obligation to at least look at that and at least start the process so that you can execute on it if you need to.
Yeah, totally agree. I think that we've done a lot of looking at second sourcing, and an interesting thing that we started looking at is really looking at the sources of the raw material that the supplier is using, right? Because even if you have dual sources, if they're both using the exact same variant of resin, for instance, and that manufacturer of the resin has a problem, if that's not also multi-sourced or available in multiple places, then that also becomes an issue in terms of business continuity. So looking at next layer deep is something else that, you know, I think that people are starting to do, and to navigate through the some of the bottlenecks and some of the things. But I totally agree. You need to have, for your critical parts, you need to have at least a couple of suppliers who can do that if you're determined that that's exactly, you know, it's critical. And there is, Marie said, you got to go through all this approvals, and in the US second sourcing is like a 30 days with the FDA if you do it right? But in some of the other parts of the world, it's much longer. I mean, look at what people are going through right now for MDR, and some of the Asian countries are, you know, 9 months to a year to 18 months even for regulatory approvals. So once, if you're getting into starting new products, think about, can I have 2 people building this right from the beginning and get those all into your regulatory submissions, get them into your biocomp testing, because that's an area where you're gonna have issues. And even, you know, look at resins. You know, every single one of us uses catheters in some way or another, right? And they all have a resin that goes, that catheter is extruded with. Well, if your particular one, and you've got this one thing that you've done all your testing on, if that has a disruption, then your supplier of that catheter is not going to be able to supply it. So looking at that and preparing for that next level of business continuity, I think is also really good advice.
Yeah, I think that is a critical point, Joanne. Is you really have to look at your sub-tier supply base, and, you know, what are those materials, like when you know, design in a custom resin that's only available from one source and has risk of, you know, being discontinued. I mean, that you're exposing yourself. So I think that's where, you know, I found a lot of exposure or even issues that came up. It wasn't the primary supply base, it was the sub-tier.
That draws me right into the question, Joanne, I was going to bring up and talk about the raw material shortages that we kind of mentioned offline, and how workforce shortages actually play into a lot of those things, right? How many of these things are natural resource issues, and how many of them are actually workforce related?
And I couldn't give you the percentages, but I can tell you it's probably all of the above, right? That some of it is, you know, with the labor situation the way it is, through all the tiers of the supply chain, it's, you know, businesses are looking to consolidate their product offerings. You know, if X company makes 30 different variants of something, boy, they're going to be a lot more efficient if they only make 15, right? And so therefore, they may not drop you like a hot potato, but if your volumes are not big and that's the only thing you've qualified, that might be one of the things that's on their chopping block as a lower level, whether it be tier 1 or even tier 2 supplier. So that labor shortage is actually impacting that raw material that your component manufacturers actually need to do. So I think it's that. I'm not sure that it's, in some cases it shows up as, you know, availability versus true depletion of raw materials. I know that, if you're looking at, what is the impact of Ukraine, right? And what materials comes out of that region. And it may not be the end components, but there's some precious metals and things maybe that come out of that region, or other things that are that there in Eastern Europe is the source of that. And it may not just be Ukraine, it might be that block, and that's very disrupted right now. So I think that there's lots of things that trigger those shortages through, but I don't think it's necessarily depletion of natural resources as much as it is availability of them. But I think it's probably more companies looking at through these labor shortages, or even through business ups and downs, that they need to keep aligning what their offerings are. So I think we're seeing some of all of that, and some of it's natural disasters. I mean, we a number of people in multiple industries were impacted by epoxy shortages, right? Adhesives. And if a sub-supplier is got an issue, then that is impacting everybody at the same level. And some things that are like those things that have shelf life, you can't really stockpile them. That's not an option, right? You can't stockpile the finished good. Now maybe you could build up your relationship with the sub-supplier so that before it gets into a state where it's shelf life dependent, then you can do some things there. But so I think that those are really the areas that I see. But I think labor is just a huge thing right across the world right now.
So my question would be, okay, so there's risk prevention, right? There's risk, measures that you can take. What does a company do if you're hit with this? How long does a supplier have to give you to let you know that is going to be going away? So how much lead time do you usually get on something like that, or could you anticipate? And then what do you do?
So I think that there's a couple of things, right? You could say that the first answer that might come to your mind is, well, if you've got a really good supply agreement, then you could say, well, you've got to give me 12 months notice or 18 months notice or whatever's in your supply agreement. However, that doesn't really help you in the, well, I need to push out your lead time by 18 months, right? So it's, there's one thing to say, okay, so there's nothing in typical supply agreements that say, okay, yes, you have to provide it to me, but if I can't provide it, I can change your lead time, and that's effectively the same. So I'm not sure how you protect yourself contractually, which is kind of where you might think of initially. Again, it's the relationship that Marie brought up, and just making sure that they understand how critical they are to your organization and to your customers, effectively the hospitals and the patients. So I think that you get more, I always say you get more with sugar than salt, right? So that, or the other one is, the best contract you negotiate is the one that sits in the drawer and you never have to open it again after you get it done negotiating it. So I think that relationship is going to be stronger for you than any kind of contractual protection you can have.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the contracts, and quality agreements say, you need to have at least, 18 months notice, because they know the qualification process. So it's in their best interest to give you the heads up too, but there are some things that are outside of their control too. So it's just, making sure you're having those ongoing communications and managing those key supplier relationships so that you do get the heads up and, you can make those changes.
And I think it's planning from the design side. To me, it goes right back to design and the initial qualifications. And if you hem yourself into only one variant of one thing, then you might get stuck. And so the more you can encourage the design window to not just be open from a specification standpoint, but also from what gets qualified early on, which is hard for a small company to do, I think, because you're trying to get one to work. But as soon as you're past that, you got to get one to work till you need to get thousands to work. Then I think that's being a little bit more flexible with.
Yeah, having been through that world many times, big companies and small companies, that window she's referring to, be it like performance window or tolerance window or material flexibility or whatever it may be. I can't tell you how many times I've been a part of a project where a thing was on the edge. Nobody knew it. Product got launched. We're 2 quarters into ramp. The failure rate coming off the line is incredible. And now it's back in a design cycle, and you're basically pulling all that down, tearing it back to the studs, and going back to like theory of operation for a thing, right? A pump or whatever it might be. Having seen that many times, the biggest advice I could give to the designers and engineers that out there is don't design yourself into a corner. Getting it to work is not necessarily the right solution. Getting it to work and with some flexibility is a far, far better outcome.
Yeah, I think tolerance analysis at the design level is critical.
Oh yeah.
Right? Just because one worked, that well, the first 10 that you got from the supplier doesn't mean they're all going to work.
It's actually one of the worst things you can do is solve your problem and think it's licked and then go launch and then find out, you know, your window was like this and you're right here on the edge. It worked, but there's going to be a fallout of, you know, X% and now you're losing money.
That's great. So we do have just a
critical to have on the market, right? That's not what you want to see.
Yeah. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure if there's audience questions, please put them in the Q&A. But, you know, just thinking about it for the group while people are putting questions in, you know, producing a product from design to manufacture, assembly has a very long supply chain. We've talked a little bit about that, but there are so many moving pieces that you have no control over. With that in mind, you know, if you could say one thing is kind of what gives you pause or kind of keeps you up at night when you're thinking about supply chain and manufacturing right now, anything popping to mind for the three of you? Like what do you think the biggest thing people should be looking at right now is?
I can give you my Joanne Marie will have a better answer for the regulatory world and like production at large. I think that the MPD, MPI space is underserved in thinking this way. And frankly, the longer that takes, the time to revenue is just increasing, right? So if you don't get the MPD stuff right, you never get to make any money. And we don't, in the MPD space, typically have the luxury of minds like my co-panelists thinking about how do you fix the wild west of like, you know, nodes of prototype suppliers, let's say, right? Or your EV builds or whatever. You're not into the level where people are really, really, really spending money. So you don't get the attention. So again, that's why I made the shift in my career to kind of help focus in that space, because I think it's ripe for innovation. So that'd be my one takeaway is, or one thing that I think about a lot, and I'm trying to focus on helping move the needle. Time to market matters. Getting there with the right amount of iterations, more iterations in the same amount of time, or the same amount of iterations in less time, or whatever it may take to get there. So we can solve things like get that TA right, get your material selection right, get your theory of operation just so. And I don't think that engineers, designers in that space have the luxury of efficiency when it comes to getting what they need when they need it. And frankly, they hate it, right? So do you want an engineer engineering something, or do you want them on the phone with suppliers trying to gather quotes for, you know, half their week? Doesn't make any sense. I did it, so I'm trying to help people fix that. That'd be my takeaway.
I guess I would just say, you know, I think the one big thing is, you know, just what's going to be next. So not knowing what's going to be next. And I think, you know, for the sourcing procurement professionals, you know, having that network of not only suppliers, but also some of your colleagues too. I've had, you know, people that are competitors or, you know, other companies in the industry reach out to if I have a source for this or that. So I think that's where, you know, Todd, to your point, you don't want your R&D team doing that, but you want your procurement professionals that have that network and that are good problem solvers and that can either, you know, work with their existing supply base or their contacts in the industry to, you know, resolve whatever comes up. So I think you have to, you know, just be a good problem solver. You know, I've seen a lot of things happen over my career and nothing has ever been a catastrophic event, I guess, which is a good thing. Even though there's been times I've gotten the phone calls that I was like, oh, this is not going to work out. You know, there's always something that, you know, you can get to resolve the issue. It may not be obvious at first, but you just keep working it.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I would add in this, the craziness of the last couple of years, you find out when a company can be resilient, right? And what do you do when that natural disaster or a catastrophe or whatever it is, that shortage happens? And really looking inside to say, hey, could we be more efficient? Is there opportunity to improve our yields, right? If I lose 50% of this particular thing during my process, well, geez, if I get that up to 80%, then I don't lose as much and my supply lasts longer. And maybe that's just long enough to get to when the supplier can start delivering it again. So we've been really focused on the supply chain side, but I also think that if you think about that manufacturing side and the engineering side is getting all those minds together and saying, hey, okay, we've got this issue as a company. How do we resolve the issue as a company and not just the poor buyer who's got to go out and try to scrape the bushes for what else they can find? It's really collectively, how do we conserve what we have? How do we, look at, are there other engineering solutions that we maybe have qualified on a different product line and that could be applicable, may still need some submission activity, but hopefully with, at least the safety stocks that you plan to hold anyways, that buys you some time to do that. So I would say, don't just think about the part or the component, also think about what other things within the manufacturing system could also influence how you survive these, we'll call them disasters or
Yeah, Kelly and I agree. Like if you go from a product and you're running a 90% yield and you're on supply allocation, well, go put some engineers on that. And if you can get it to 95 or high 90s,
yeah,
that, to your point, can solve the problem immediately. So it is a collective challenge, and it's not just, purchasing to go hound suppliers. There's other ways to solve it.
Yeah, and even like some of the things that shelf life, right? Shelf life, you kind of get, okay, you got what you got, but are there ways from a quality system standpoint to really work with suppliers around shelf life and think, so those are some of the challenging ones. A piece of metal, nothing happens to it, but a piece of metal is actually an easier problem to solve because you have to go through second sourcing, but it's probably not going to, require as much testing and stuff as other things would. But those glues that are all across your product, or the elements that are the resins that are all across your product set, those are going to be harder. So that's the
So I love the comments that you're both just making about it's not just a supply chain personnel problem, right? This isn't just the problem for one group in your organization to go solve. This is an opportunity to kind of take a look at your whole process and see where there could be things that are improved throughout. So I think that's a really great point. One quick follow-up, how willing are companies to share? Once you found a really good supplier, I would imagine there's probably a little bit of hoarding that goes on in that knowledge base. How willing are people to share that kind of information, or is it really hard to find?
I don't know that there's a lot of, like, if Marie was at Medtronic, that I would pick her up and say, hey, I just found this great supplier of this. I'm not sure that would happen in reality too often. I would say in my electronics days, I think that it did happen a little bit more than I've experienced in med device. And I think it's only because there's such commodities in electronics. You've got the Jables and the Flextronixes and the Celesticas and those guys, right? And I was always reaching out to my counterparts in other fields and saying, hey, what's been your experience with this contract manufacturer these days? I mean, I did a lot of that back then, but I'm not sure that even at the raw component level that we did a lot of stuff like that back then. I don't know.
Understood. Yeah, makes sense.
Unless
so
somebody specifically says, can you give me a reference? Then,
Yeah, that's different.
Yeah.
So one question from the audience. So what are the speakers' thoughts on the current environment, the challenges are being caused by changes within the regulatory field. So within the regulatory world. So FDA kind of changing requirements around certain XYZ. What's kind of where you see the big impacts happening right now?
I think in some instances it's extending the lead time, the qualification process, but I do think regulators are also pretty in tune with what's really impacting the industry. So they've tried to work with, companies in terms of, streamlining the qualification process. For example, there was a ethylene oxide sterilization shortage, and, they really partnered with industry to help them, fast track that approval process. So I think, FDA and other regulatory agencies want to see, the industry be able to serve patients. So I think they're trying to navigate that. But, at the same time, you are going to see things like, EU, MDR, whatever that, is extending lead time. So it's part of our reality too.
Mhm. Yeah, and the ethylene oxide was a perfect example that we were all tracking very closely for a while. So I think that's right now I think the biggest struggle people have is the EU. I think that once all of those notified bodies get back on track again, because 3 to 5 years ago when I first came to Abiomed, it was actually much quicker to get things through EU. So I think that this is a disruption, but I would expect that MDR over the next couple of years gets more streamlined again.
We can only hope so. So from your lips to FDA's ears.
It's the FDA around the world. I think FDA is actually doing okay.
I agree. I think they've managed their shortages pretty well. I would give kudos to FDA on that. So unless we have any further questions, I'm just going to open it up to the panels for any last comments or tips you want to share right now for folks kind of navigating this process.
Designers and engineers, go make friends with your supply chain and procurement and buyer counterparts. It's a good career move, and it'll help you design a better product.
Actually, I think that's a great tip. I mean, I do think, leverage the expertise of the procurement team, and, for those that are in the supply management function and role, to continue even during the pandemic, if you're working remotely, develop those relationships, look out for new sources, know what's happening in the industry, and, network, and be a good problem solver.
And I would say have fun, because it's a wild ride right now. And for those of us, a lot of us in the supply chain and manufacturing world are actually started life as engineers, and it's just one day after the other of solving problems. So it's kind of fun if you look at it with the right attitude.
That's awesome. Well, Todd, Joanne, Marie, thank you, all three of you, for such a wonderful session. I really appreciate, obviously, the wealth of experience and the breadth of knowledge that's on this panel, and definitely appreciate you guys being a part of this.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and kind of get ready to transition to our next panel discussion. I do see all of our panelists are online, which is wonderful. So Lisa, Brian, and Alyssa, if you guys want to go ahead and kind of start your video and get set up. I know you're all there. We are going to transition to our next session. And I'm going to apologize for all of you for my voice issue. I'm actually on day 2 of COVID, but I think I'm hanging in pretty good and solid there. But if the voice starts to go, I apologize a little bit. So I think Lisa, great, perfect. Everybody's joining in. So before we transition to our next session with our panelists on seeing green, the value of sustainability and ESG in your supply chain, I did just want to take one more moment to say thank you to our sponsors for this series, which are Capaccio Environmental Engineering and Thermo Fisher Scientific. They are obviously supporting this program so that there is no charge for attendees, and we're so thrilled to have them be wonderful partners and supporters of ours. So Massmedic could not do it without them. we also could not do it without our wonderful panelists, all of who are our members. So I think we're just right about on time. So to be cognizant, make sure there's lots of time for Q&A. I am going to introduce Lisa Wilk and see if you would like to take things over from here. I do have slides at the ready when you are ready for them. So you just let me know.
Hello, I'm Lisa Wilk. I'm the CEO of Capacity Environmental Engineering, and we help companies strategize and develop and implement sustainability programs. And I'm really excited to be here on this panel with all these great panelists, with Lisa and Alyssa and Brian. It's great that they come from different size companies and they're at different stages in the development of their sustainability program, and had an opportunity to speak with each of them before today's panel, and they have some really fantastic things to share with you today. So I'm looking forward to that. And I thought, Rachel, maybe before we get started, I could share a couple slides from there was a survey that Massmedic sent out about sustainability. And one of the questions we had asked was about the importance of sustainability. And I know I was found it very interesting, just the general shift in the importance of sustainability over the past year and a half to 2 years. And I think we have a slide that's like a pie chart that it shows what the respondents said. And there were about 350 participants in the survey, and I think it's going to come up shortly, but basically, I think about 35% said that sustainability or ESG was a pillar in their mission or vision statement or their value statement, which I thought was very interesting. And another 47% said it was that they're working on developing an implementation strategy. And so I thought, and really only 3% said that they had a hard time justifying the importance of it to their company. So I thought that was very interesting. And then
just to chime in here real quickly, so I want to make sure you guys can see the slides. Can everyone see those? Panelists, can you see them?
Yeah, and
okay, great. Just want to make sure.
And I think 88% said that they were able to establish a business case for sustainability in their organizations, and the drivers that they saw primarily were investors and customers, and in some cases regulators, possibly the SEC or EU regulations or FDA regulations, or and another one was talent acquisition and retention. It was a driver for many companies. And I thought I'd ask the panelists whether this was reflective of what you're seeing in your companies, and what the drivers might be for your organizations, if so. And maybe you could share with that. I don't know who wants to start with that, but maybe Lisa, would you like to start?
Sure, I'd be happy to start. Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Brady. I'm from Insulet Corporation, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer, VP of Global Sustainability there. And yes, I think this resonates very well with what we're seeing. Certainly investors and our customers are very interested in what we're doing around ESG. I would say also our employees, I think are kind of the other large stakeholder. The regulators, certainly for moving into new markets, and a lot of the regulations that we've seen coming out, certainly in other countries, the UK and Europe in general, and some other countries where there's a lot more attention paid to environmental regulations as well as social responsibility in the supply chain. And then I think too, for our industry, healthcare providers and payers are paying attention to this as well. And so I think that, the stakeholder community certainly are these particular areas here on this chart. And then there's additional ones that I think have come into this. It's no longer kind of a niche or, nice to have to do it, but it's become a lot more mainstream, almost to required to be focused on ESG at this point. And I think the larger stakeholder community is driving that.
Yeah. Alyssa and Brian, are you also seeing that in your companies?
Yeah, I would say this is Alyssa with Thermo Fisher Scientific, and this graph lines up quite well with what I would have expected. And like Lisa mentioned, a very active employee community as well. So on any given day, it's really fun because you're never quite sure who's going to tap you on the shoulder, really with a new ask or with an aligned ask, be it investors or customers or employees. So we have to be able to tell that story and fill in those gaps kind of across a broad stakeholder community.
Yeah, and we're seeing the same thing as well at Axis Vascular. We're a small 30-person startup in Billerica, and this very much aligns with what we're seeing. I've been presenting to boards of directors for the last 9 years in different capacities, and I would say in the last 3 quarters is the first time I'm really getting supply chain questions around these lines. So that's new, and I think that's a sign of good things to come, that we're looking at these from a startup perspective as well. Certainly would say from a customer perspective, we're starting to get these questions on all of our RFPs. So we're getting those questions as well in terms of where we can add value, what we're doing from a startup perspective. And then I think the employee is probably represented in the talent acquisition retention category. We get those requests as well. I think employees are looking for this. They want to be aligned with something that they value. So on any given day, different types of questions from, when are we getting an EV charger outside to, what are we doing for this next product development effort? So very much aligned with what we're doing.
Yeah. No, it's definitely the interest and the importance of it is definitely increasing. And I know in the summit, we're talking about the supply chain, and in the previous session, there was a focus on, the value of looking at diversifying your manufacturing and supply chain operations in light of the pandemic and shortages and business continuity planning. And sustainability is also a way to manage risk and identify opportunities. And wondering what are some ways that you're currently integrating sustainability in your operations and supply chain, and maybe share some successes or even some challenges that you're facing right now. So
sure, I can jump in there and
Sure.
start. So again, we're a very small company. What's unique about us, though, is we're entirely vertically integrated. So we are bringing on kitting suppliers and things of that nature. We make a product that has a wide range of kitting components, so we're outsourcing that effort. But in terms of all of our device manufacturing, we do that from beginning to end. And typically, I would say at this stage of a startup, it's trying to find something as quickly as you can. You're price sensitive, you're timeline sensitive, but we're finding ourselves in a position, much in response to the last 2 years, but looking at tracing materials all the way back, through the supply chain, trying to make sure we're diversified, trying to make sure we understand where these materials are coming from. And that's a risk mitigation as much of a, value creation, exercise. And we talk about that a lot in terms of what we're doing at Axis Vascular. It's about value creation. And we see, all the pillars of ESG, aligned to that.
yeah. And I know, Alyssa, you're doing a lot with Thermo Fisher there. So,
Yeah, so we really are kind of quite integrated with our supply chain risk organization, use a lot of the same tools and kind of external risk factors when we take a look at risk, and just think of these ESG topics, so environmental, social, and governance, as longer term effects that we might see on the same supply partners. But what I think is really great is, as we have these discussions with suppliers, spend time with them, talk to them, tell them about the future that we want with respect to environmental and social performance. It brings us into a closer partnership, and it gives them a chance to tell us what their forward-looking plans are, which can be a really strong view into what they're thinking about from their own risks and opportunities perspective. And the more that we have visibility to see what they see as their risks, and how they're mitigating those risks, the better off we're going to be prepared, not only to understand, okay, are they meeting, this particular ask or this particular expectation, but also are they the kind of company that we want to be really working with closely for the long haul. So I think it's super well aligned, and the work that we're doing today on some of these issues like climate change that feel, bigger or scarier, or that they may not be solved for in a few weeks of a lead time adjustment or a vendor change, really going to give us a much more holistic picture of where our supply chain can go in the long term, and where we might have things being able to see around the corner a little bit and prepare for problems before they arise in the future.
Yeah, no, that visibility is really important. And how about you, Lisa?
Yeah, I love what Alyssa and Brian said. I think those are really great points around the value piece and around building those supplier relationships and partnerships and strengthening those. We're a mid-sized company, and sustainability is fairly new to us. Just have been developing the strategy and roadmap for the last year and a half. And I think one of our greater challenges in the supply chain is our growth. So we are growing at such a rapid pace, and we're moving from more of that startup, smaller company, into a mid-sized company solidly. And so we're growing exponentially. We're growing in our supply chain footprint, our manufacturing, which includes our manufacturing footprint. We're growing in the number of employees. We're growing in terms of our internal systems and capabilities. And so as you grow, it brings additional risks, but it also makes it a lot harder to tackle some of these incredibly important issues, such as climate change. So if you're adding suppliers and adding manufacturing into your footprint, how are you going to move towards carbon neutrality, right? So, so those things get really challenging, and that's where really looking at the fundamentals and the systems and how you're going about doing this and being smart about your strategies becomes much more important.
Yeah, and one thing that you, Alyssa mentioned, and all of you actually talked about, is this idea of collaboration with suppliers and how important that is. And ideally you'd love everybody to be here, but there is a path to get there, and there, and how you can move the needle in a impactful and positive way. And maybe you could share some of the ways that you do collaborate with suppliers.
I can start.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's a great question. I'd say, like you mentioned, we have to meet suppliers where they are on that maturity journey. And so that could be as simple as inviting a supplier to participate in a forum such as this to learn specifically about a program we'd like for them to engage in. So if we would like our suppliers to, for instance, reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, well, first of all, we have to give them the tools and the ability to understand what their greenhouse gas emissions footprint is. So we do things like partner with groups like CDP to provide that training, make it available to our suppliers, seek to understand where they are on their journey, and really not penalize them for being early in the experience. We're really asking them to come to the table with what they have to offer in these early years, while we continue to tell them where we'd like them to be, and help understand where they are and where the gaps are. And that's really the exercise we're doing this year. So we've had our own program for several years, a sustainability program for our company, but our supply chain engagement is newer and still growing and accelerating quite quickly. So I think we'll learn a lot, to be honest. We are doing these first steps, and we've been thinking about, what are unique ways to work together? Could we take our size and scale in things like the procurement of renewable energy and give opportunities for suppliers to do that? Not something that we're offering today, but when we look at our roadmap of partnership opportunities, could we bring smaller supplier partners to the table to participate in group procurement of renewable energy? In our sector, there's already a program like this, and Thermo Fisher's actually enrolled in it as a supplier to large pharma, and that's called the Energize program. And I would encourage, folks on this call that might be involved in that, the supply chains of those 7 large pharma organizations already, to consider. It's a platform for learning about renewable energy. And then hopefully it will result in some collaborative opportunities to work together for those companies that may not have access to larger scale renewable energy on their own. So those are a few examples. And I think we're going to see in the next 5 years a lot of new ways that we can't really imagine today. I know there's been people talking about preferred terms or supply chain financing opportunities, some things that would be a really big win for suppliers, and send a really strong signal into the supply chain for how to help folks get where we want them to go.
Yeah, well, this is some great suggestions, especially the Energize program. Renewable energy is a huge target for a number of companies, but how do you get there? So that's great. Ryan, you look like you were going to add something there. So.
Yeah, so I mean, I appreciate that perspective. I think there's a lot that Lisa and Alyssa have to say that I can benefit from, that our company can benefit from, because we're on the very front end of this, right? We're at the very beginning of our life cycle. So when we're talking to suppliers and other companies, we're typically the smaller smaller group at the table, but learning a lot from other people. And I think that was mentioned in one of the earlier questions in terms of relationship building and just having these conversations. I think for us, we look at these things opportunistically. So if we're sourcing something new, or we're at the beginning of a development program because we are so earlier in our life cycle, it's a great time to at least start having these conversations and learn from others, throughout the process. Similarly on the supply chain side with our customers, because we deal with a lot of mobile vascular businesses and hospitals, and we're dealing with supply chain counterparts there. The value proposition that we can offer is that our materials, the benefit is that these devices can remain in place much longer. You don't have the same failure rates as some of the classic polymeric materials that are used in these devices. So having that conversation in terms of the value that we can create for our partners, for our customers, that's a big part of what we're focusing effort on.
That's great.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I was going to say similarly, what you're describing is adding value by going more circular, right? So the circular economy, keeping components and products in use longer, reusing and recycling as much as possible. There's tremendous innovation happening in that space and tremendous value being created by various companies. And that's where you can partner with suppliers in a significant way. And even determine if there's, profit sharing opportunities to do so. But those are areas where I think a lot of companies are going to be headed to create a higher value proposition. I like the way Brian's explaining it, to both partners and build on that relationship, because I think a lot of the suppliers can bring tremendous innovation. And when you partner with an innovative company and you put those two things together, you can really accomplish quite a bit, particularly when you're looking at the whole life cycle of your product and starting to manage that life cycle more. You need all those pieces put in place.
Yeah, no, that's important. And it was interesting in the survey. One of the a couple questions that were asked was, how important is it that those on your approved supplier list have some sort of sustainability goals in place, or ESG goals and practices? And I think 62% said that it was very important, and only 4% said that it was not a concern. So I thought that was interesting. And actually another related question was, would you approve or not approve a vendor based on their eco footprint or what you were seeing in their metrics? And I was surprised it was very high. 68% said yes. And so I don't know if that's reflective of what you see, either from your own customers or whether or in your supply chain. But seeing something similar. Or,
yeah, I think those
Go
are
ahead.
outstanding results, actually. And, you know, I think it's a testament to the industry maturing.
Yes.
Because I think it takes some investment in resources to be able to put those requirements out there and to enforce them. And so, you know, many years ago, I think companies were starting to go down that path and realizing it's harder than it seems.
Yeah.
You know, you can tell your suppliers you want them to do X, Y, and Z, but to actually track that and do performance assessments and build that into your supplier performance scorecards and enforce it, and really think about if you're going to shift your business or move business away if they're not high performers, you know, that requires a lot of resource, time, and effort. So I think those numbers are terrific if people are saying, yes, it is important and we're actually doing it. The first thing is to set those requirements with your suppliers and say, this is what we expect of our suppliers. And then to Alyssa's point earlier, we'll help you, we'll give you learnings and education and help build those capabilities. And then later on comes the, you know, the collaboration and the, okay, now that you're doing it, it's time to set real targets and goals, and we're going to hold you accountable to that. But that's a whole journey. And that takes time on both companies' sides. And so that's why I'm saying that's remarkable to hear those numbers, because in a past life, having done that before, it's not easy. So that's great. Good news.
Yeah, I wonder what types of metrics that you feel are material that should be tracked.
Well, I can give you an example in the climate space of one of the metrics that we're thinking about tracking. And it's really, especially if for those that are familiar with emissions, greenhouse gas emissions accounting. So in our supply chain, those are part of Thermo Fisher's Scope 3, or indirect value chain emissions. And apologies if this is new for some folks, because I know there's a lot of vocabulary that goes along with it. But if you're not already aware, those emissions are typically much, much larger than all the emissions from your direct footprint, even if you have manufacturing operations like we do at Thermo Fisher. So it's very critical to us that our suppliers start their decarbonization journey. However, the way that we do carbon accounting today, and the way that most companies and corporations do carbon accounting today at scale, is actually pegged to spend. So it's not very granular methodology for estimating these emissions. So rather than go to a supplier and ask them, you know, reduce your emissions to us by 3% or 5%, which in fact would be quite hard for us to Lisa's point, to accurately measure and track progress against. We're asking our suppliers to set science-based targets for emission reduction, and we're tracking the amount of spend that we have with suppliers who have set those targets. And so that's considered what's called the supplier engagement target. And it's a way for us to show that the dollars that we're spending are going towards companies that share our objectives and are working on this. And we expect, you know, not everybody, to our earlier point, will be able to set that science-based target this year, but we have a rather aggressive target for 5 years from now. So really to bring people on that journey over the course of the next 5 years. And we're going to publicly report that percentage every year to show progress, try to be transparent where we're not meeting the mark, understand, are there particular parts of our spend profile or categories where we need to really put a deeper emphasis. So in our first year, we were only about 6% of our spend with folks that had already set science-based targets, but an additional 15% have committed to setting those targets. So we're kind of just hoping that every year we get that snowball effect. And then we're going to, you know, support suppliers where we need, but they should be able to understand where their biggest opportunities for decarbonization lie. And that's where putting the onus on the company to set their own target and to execute their own roadmap. You know, it's really, I think Brian, you said earlier, the suppliers are the experts in what they do, right? They're the experts in their business. So giving them autonomy, it's to set those targets and to move down their glide path in the way that makes sense for them. I'm hopeful that that's going to be really meaningful. but we will have to support them on the way.
Yeah, no, it's great the way you look at that too. It's a sort of they're committing to it or they're setting them, because it's not something you can do overnight to set those science-based targets.
Yeah, we're in that same process too. You know, I think we have a lot to share and have empathy. We're in the committed phase of our own science-based target.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
something that came from, you know, some of our customers asking, you know, how's Thermo Fisher going to? And so we put a public commitment out, and we're in the process where we'll do a validation with an organization called the Science-Based Targets Initiative.
Yeah.
If you're new on your carbon journey, make sure, you know, I think that that's a really good corporate benchmark for understanding what the expectations across corporations are, so that when you set a target, whether it for yourself or for your supply chain, you're aligned with what the IPCC guidance suggests.
Yeah, there's some great resources on that site, the science-based targets, .org. Yeah.
I think another space too, I mean, we've been talking a lot about the environmental side, but on the social responsibility side, there's other performance metrics that are just as important to ensure that our suppliers are holding up to the standards that we would expect of them for ethical business behavior and social responsibility, labor, environmental health and safety, and some of these other topics around social responsibility. And so we have a code of conduct that we have our suppliers acknowledge and that we measure to make sure that our suppliers are acknowledging that. And then you build management systems around that to make sure that your suppliers are adhering to those requirements. And that's another area where you can do performance management and put metrics in place to see how they're performing against either self-assessments or audits or those types of performance measures, which are quite different from the environmental side.
Yeah. Like what are some of the things that you measure, for suppliers relative to your code of conduct?
So I think that, a lot of the best practice is around measuring progress. So making sure that their audit scores continue to get better, that they're participating in capability building. Again, it's more of a collaborative process, and making sure that they're, if there are any non-conformances in any way to your code, that they are closing those immediately and that they're not repeating them over time. So making sure there's no repeating of those, making sure that they're enforcing the code and the requirements, and that their performance scores get better over time. Those are kind of the key ones. I'm sure others can add to that list.
Yeah, I think for us, again, we're so early in this discussion. I think just a couple of sort of parallels to what Lisa and Alyssa were just mentioning. And I think for us, on the supplier side, we're having conversations, and we're just encouraged by the partners that we're working with that are willing to have that conversation with us, just collecting data, having a conversation before we even set metrics. Again, more on the commercial side, but considering the supply chain, we're very focused on value-based care, which is a big discussion right now. And for us, again, it's the durability of our material and just being willing to have a conversation and make commitments in terms of how that's going to perform long term versus what they're currently using today. So those are important supply chain conversations that we're having with facilities, and I think it's aligned again with a lot of the things we're talking about. I think I'm learning a lot just in the conversation in terms of what some of the larger companies are able to do in terms of resources and these types of issues. But I think again at our stage, planning for the future, opportunistically building these into our conversations.
Yeah, that like this whole collaboration and working together to move forward is
That's right.
A consistent theme.
Brian, I think that you're also a great example of you don't have to be super large to do what is the right thing to do. And in fact, building some of these in as born in concepts and ideas should help them naturally evolve really organically before your supply chain is tens of thousands of companies and it becomes this overly complex management approach. every time you partner with somebody out the gates that you believe meets your value set and is growing with you and understands your expectations from the start, that's going to be way easier than trying to turn the tide on somebody after they're, really some critical part of your product. And
absolutely. And that's a mind shift in VC, right? I think historically, maybe more of a focus on profitability, but I think now that's changed, right? I think especially in the last 5 or 10 years of discussions, it really is about that triple bottom line, trying to make sure that we're making smart investments, and I think that's what's expected of us as a small company that's creating that value.
Yeah. I guess for companies that are not as far along in their journey, and maybe you could share some things that they could be doing. Lisa, you're at a mid-sized company now, but you've had experience at different size companies, and so you might have some thoughts on that as well. So.
Yeah, and we're starting our journey on some of these things. That's why some things I'm saying, well, it's best practice, just pulling from previous companies I've worked from. But yeah, I think you have to start somewhere, and I think in some ways the smaller companies can actually go faster. They can be more agile. It's a smaller supply base, and there's kind of less hoops to go through. And I just think, having come from really large companies, you're more agile, you can do more, you can have those conversations, the relationships are really strong with your suppliers. And you are just starting out, to what Alyssa and Brian were talking about, as you're selecting your suppliers, you can just embed these things into your supplier selection process. And so we're definitely doing that. We're making it clear, what these requirements are. There's lots of industry tools and things that you can leverage. So, with our code of conduct, we're leveraging the industry tools and code, and that helps us to accelerate. So, even if you're small, you don't necessarily have to build huge teams to accelerate. You have to be able to leverage what's out there, and in particular from the industry. The more you can leverage what a lot of the big brands have already done and what the industry can offer, a lot of those tools come with those industry associations. And it's a great way to accelerate and not build it all yourself. And whether it's the Science-Based Targets Initiative that already has tools, or whether it's industry groups for code of conduct and social responsibility, those are all ways that you can accelerate what you're doing without building it all on your own. So I would definitely encourage folks to think about where they can partner with organizations that have the tool sets already. And the suppliers like it better too, because they don't like another code with another set of requirements that's different than the standard stuff they're already used to, and another set of audits, or another set of emissions and energy reduction type methodologies, right? Like they would like to have the same methodologies, the same measurements in place, so that they have less fatigue, because they're constantly having to answer to all these customers about what they're doing and all of the performance measurements that are there. So the more that we can come together on some of these things that we're all trying to do, the easier it is for the suppliers. And there's a lot of appreciation from the suppliers that you don't go off and do something completely different, because that just requires a lot of energy and effort on them.
Yeah, that's a really good point about trying to standardize as much as possible.
If you've ever responded to a bid tender, something like that, you really want to be able to say, yes, this thing I already did shows you that I'm meeting the expectation that you're putting forth to me. So if you've ever sat on the commercial side, you can really appreciate, I think, how the supplier is feeling when you use common tools versus when you use your own. So I couldn't wave that flag any more. properly.
Yeah, resonates completely. I think we're often, resource constrained, but, able to think creatively and move quickly. So I think that's a great point, Lisa. Leverage what's there. And again, that goes back to what we've been saying from the beginning in terms of that relationship, right? Reaching out and using standard tools and just having that conversation.
Yeah. And, and it somewhat related to that is, so it's sort of the challenge of managing all this information and having systems in place to do that, or processes in place and software or whatever it might be. And, I don't know if any of you are using some types of systems that you would recommend, or if there's things that you might be thinking, these types of things work great, and this is what I would hope to see in the future, and that would make things better. I see you nodding.
I can start and then maybe take some tips from the
Sure.
others in terms of what we should add. But again, we're pretty early stage, so we're using spreadsheets right now. I mean, we have evaluated sort of lightweight ERP, but I think a consideration, again, thinking holistically, is trying to use the right tool that can actually help us with some more of that material traceability, not just tracking what we already have and when it's coming in, but just more data. So yeah, it's pretty manual right now, but looking to add something to help us as we scale.
Yeah, because it is challenging, just consistency and all that stuff. So
Yeah, so we're newer on our journey, like I mentioned earlier, and so we, our environmental metrics are manual. We are looking at tools right now because we want to definitely automate that before we start getting into scope 3 emissions collection, where it gets to be the heavy lift. So we are currently looking at different platforms and tools to see what the latest and greatest kind of digitization of this data collection process can offer us. Because as we continue to grow and our supply chain continues to grow, that will be needed. Because you don't want to grow your team just to manage all the data. If you can help it, if there's great tools out there that can help you work smart. And I'm a big believer in digitizing as much as possible and using tools as much as possible to do it. So we're under review at the moment.
Well, I can see, because whether it's your own programs that you're managing, or you're trying to track what your suppliers are doing, it's a lot of information. Like you said, you want your resources and expertise not focused on that piece of it. So, but I don't know if you had anything you wanted to share on that, Alyssa.
Sure, I'll just throw it out, with a bit more granularity, since we are kind of on the bigger side and have new tools that we use. And, this is just telling you what we do for transparency. But to Lisa's earlier point about, how would you demonstrate adherence or meeting the spirit of our supplier code of conduct, we use a tool called EcoVadis for that. So it's a platform for suppliers to be assessed, their performance to be assessed essentially through a third-party desktop review of their policies, processes, and results. And again, like Lisa mentioned, it allows us to have comparability in that review. So, and a third-party set of eyes taking a look at that documentation, so that we can understand across a broader range of ESG topics, is a supplier got the management systems, policies, tools that they need to meet that which is kind of that next step beyond just acknowledgement. And so that's a tool we use at scale, and by at scale, I mean with hundreds of suppliers a year. And then of course you have to build lots of dashboards and fun things on top of that to see how your supply chain in the whole is actually performing. Are you seeing the improvements that you want to see within companies? Are you seeing the improvements you want to see across companies? Are you seeing more and more suppliers enrolled in the program year over year? So your own, own internal tools and dashboards are really important. And if you're a procurement organization, thinking about how you're going to link to the core procurement activities. So if your company's procurement group speaks spend, then you better be able to speak spend. You better be able to talk about your programs and how they compare to all the spend categories that your company is comfortable and your procurement team is comfortable with, because that's how they do their business. So we want to make sure that our tools that we use, like EcoVadis or a climate tool, connect in and work seamlessly with those kind of spend dashboards, ERP systems. So if this tools discussion is something that you're evaluating as a company, really make sure you understand the digital landscape that your procurement organization is already working within. A lot of companies today in the procurement ERP space are building adjacent functionality to help support sustainability. Some of them are just a nice bolt-in to a tool like EcoVadis. Some are ground up building their own. Dig in, see what those things actually do and provide you. Do they actually service whatever objective you'd like to move the needle on, be it climate, labor, something else? There's no shortage of folks that do really specialized things, and then tools that also kind of look broad. But like Lisa said, there's other tools we're evaluating specific for our climate accounting across the company, and that'll likely be something perhaps different. We really want to optimize for what we're trying to achieve. So the tool landscape is huge, rapidly evolving. I recently joined an organization that's free for any procurement professionals on the call, called the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, and they've put out some free resources just kind of detailing that tools landscape. It's a nice place to start and get a sense of for companies at all different stages of their journey. But I still talk to tons of folks that, to Brian's point, are working off spreadsheets, are building their own Power BI dashboards. That's okay too. Start where you are.
Yeah. And to add on to that, because I was talking more around the environmental, the carbon accounting piece, but we did join the RBA last year. So that's the Responsible Business Alliance, and that's centered around the electronics industry, but has really formed tentacles to start to engage other industries, including ours. And so that actually does give us a set of tools to measure our suppliers. We did adopt their code of conduct, and then it comes with a lot of tools to assess performance against that. So that is a great way to quickly accelerate your social responsibility program with your suppliers.
It's also a consistency too, like you were saying earlier, like
yes,
a consistent way of doing it. Yes.
It is. And, in our industry, we do share similar suppliers sometimes to automotive and electronics and all of that, depending on what we do. And so there's already some overlap there in the membership of the RBA. So there are already suppliers in there who are very familiar with the tools, the performance assessment and the code of conduct and those requirements. But then, like Alyssa said, when you get into very specific things like your carbon accounting, you may need a different tool for something like that, particularly if you're going to move towards assurance of your reporting on that.
We've been talking about all these great tools and resources, and it might be something we can consolidate and get out to the membership. But I was wondering if there are ways that an organization like Massmedic could help with along the sustainability journey, and might be something like benchmarking, or it could be a working group, or even possibly even some sort of policy advocate. Earlier, before the today's event, and Lisa had this great idea about Fda documentation, where currently they're requiring all this paper documentation, and it'd be nice if some of it could be switched to digital. That would be great for sustainability and efficiency and all sorts of things. But I wonder if I don't know if is there an ability to have people on the webinar make any suggestions in the chat, but welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. People put Q&A in the Q&A, I think is a great opportunity. I have a question along that line, if you don't mind me chiming in. In the last panel discussion, we were talking about obviously supply chain and bottlenecks and issues around that, but one of the panelists was great and brought up the fact that bottlenecks and issues in supply chain are not just a supply chain person's problem to fix,
Yes.
right? And just as, kind of related to this, sustainability and the metrics that you're talking about are not just your jobs within the organization to understand and benchmark and implement. And made the great suggestion that, you've got excellent engineers and designers working on these products from start to finish. And how do you engage at all kind of levels of the organization to have that conversation? So would love to hear from the three of you kind of how engaged, obviously, Brian, maybe it's a little easier in a small organization. Your designers are, maybe your engineers are, maybe your supply chain folks, but how do you go about getting kind of the involvement from each piece of the crew?
It's a great question. I caught the tail end of the previous presentation. I took note of that. We had a board meeting at the end of last week, and I mentioned each of the last 3 quarters is the first time I've fielded questions on supply chain, I think, in 9 or 10 years of presenting to boards. And I made the comment last week, it's not just operations, right? It's not just operations supply chain, it's an R&D issue as well. And yeah, I think anytime you can, again, opportunistically think about these concepts and plan them into the development life cycle, the easier it is in the long term. So, that's how we look at it. And you're right, Rachel, depending on the day or the hour, it's someone from manufacturing or R&D working on perhaps the same thing. So I think it's communication, again, relationship building within the company, not just with suppliers, but having that conversation, making these discussions part of development life cycles, part of design reviews, just making it part of our ecosystem. I think that's how we bake it into what we do.
Yeah, I can add to that. I love our design engineering communities. They're super passionate about the product, and bringing in something new and challenging, they just get really jazzed up. They're like, oh, another thing we can be challenged with. And so we've spent a good part of this past year working with our R&D folks, as well as our kind of value engineering community and our engineering for manufacturing groups. And we've worked very closely to talk with them about thinking about designing for sustainability for future product, absolutely, but also how do you value engineer components today on current product? And so thinking about both of those and working with different sets of engineers to think about, and we were very specific in some places around materials that may have constraints or shortages of supply, areas that have a lot of, plastic is a large pollutant, right? And so how do we reduce our virgin plastic or remove plastic altogether? And so we've done workshops with our engineering community to engage them and make it real, really looking at our product and our components and understanding the materials that are in our products and how to make decisions around that may not be more costly, and looking at green chemistry and what are some of those things, and just kind of opening the aperture and having those actually very invigorating discussions about here's some new territory. So we've done a full workshop on design for materials and got folks really engaged and brought in an expert that could take them through and really dive deep into plastic and metals and certain types of materials. And then we've also done a workshop on designing for sustainability and designing for disassembly. And so those kind of get the mind shifting a little bit. So as they're designing for new products, they're thinking about some of the concepts that they learned in the workshops and that we workshopped together. And, we came out of those with some clear outcomes of some new principles that they've embedded now into their design process. So we have a set of documented design principles for sustainability that our R&D folks are using now.
It also seems too that with the, we talked a lot about raw material shortages and opportunities kind of in the last panel discussion. perhaps there are opportunities to really reassess the value, right? Whereas something before with coming up with a new material or a new even component in your structure would have been, nope, it's going to cost this much money and this much time, and there's no way, and this is going to be a negative for the bottom line. But if we look at this as a silver lining kind of perspective, right now, a lot of supply chains and raw materials will be thrown across the board, right? So in some cases, you're going to have to start something fresh, and you're going to have to go through the regulatory process all over again of getting something new qualified. Perhaps there's a way for companies to now make the monetary value assessment in a way and make that case internally where they couldn't before.
I think that's right. That's really almost the story of Access Vascular, right? I think we looked at conventional vascular access devices, the challenges that are facing patients and clinicians with respect to that material, and we've developed a new hydrophilic material, hydrogel-based material that solves that problem from the bottoms up. And so it's good for patients. It reduces complications, and it's good for the environment on the whole, right? It's a material that has a better total life cycle analysis compared to the conventional materials. That's really how we look at it. We don't, again, because we're so early stage, we tend to talk a lot about the patient perspective and don't use the ESG terminology as much, but it's really built into the fabric of what we do. It's really a material technology solution that addresses, all the aspects of ESG.
One last question, because I mean, this is something that I think, we as Massmedic are really interested in and have done a number of working group sessions on, but understanding the perspective now of the patient as an advocate for what they use and what goes in their body, right? I would say even 10 years ago, this was not a thing. There were groups who knew more about their health, who knew more about, and usually it was, industry perspective. Anytime I ask, I hear from someone in industry, oh, I got this procedure, I got this implant. I always have to ask them, oh, do you know what you got? And the answer is, of course I know what I got. I'm in industry. I knew what to ask for. But I think more and more we're seeing, obviously, patients having more information. They have more knowledge. They're armed, especially with younger generations. So it's not going to be too long, Brian. I'm going to say we're in the next 10 years, people are going to go in and say, nope, I want this catheter because I know exactly what it does. Now, they may or may not have a lot of choice in it, but they're going to know what is happening around them. And obviously, Lisa, you're seeing that with your potters, right? They know what is going on their body and what's going in their body, and they're choosing it. So how do we kind of learn from the consumer industry a little bit that perspectives are shifting, and what can MedTech do to keep up?
Fantastic question. I think sometimes it's hard from like an emergent procedural standpoint. Certainly, it's probably a lot easier in terms of what Lisa's working on. But it's a conversation to be had. And again, I think that's why we're having that conversation directly with payers and facilities and supply chain at the facility, and making that case with data, right? And it's part of that value-based care that I mentioned. And I think ultimately, I think consumers are smart, patients are smart. I think everyone realizes you have to advocate for your own health. And I think, again, having those conversations, it's important.
Yeah, and I think, we serve the diabetes community. And in that community, one of the things that I've learned directly from customers is how much waste is created with managing diabetes. And that was a big learning that I was not aware of. And so, for us to focus on that is really important. It's important to our customers. And it's really front and center because it's visual, it's tactical, it's part of their lives. And we're trying to simplify their management of diabetes and simplify all the complexities that come with it. And it's not just giving them an advanced technology product and that you have modern manufacturing and you can offer the best in class service to them and make sure they have a high quality product, but it's now becoming more of helping them manage the life cycle of that product, which is creating waste in their house, right? In their apartment and where they live. And so, we have to think through, how do we help our customers with that too, to help manage the entire life cycle of our product. And that's because we're a consumer-based product too. So, it's very much top of mind for us. And we are hearing more from customers who are struggling with that because they don't want to be contributing to the waste problem.
Yeah.
Those were my questions. We do still have just a couple minutes if anybody wants to pop anything into the Q&A. But Lisa, I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to ask, or I can always ask.
Yeah, no, I just, if anyone had any words of wisdom that they haven't already shared about, this journey that they wanted to share with the audience.
I just want to go back
Okay.
to kind of what you said at the beginning, which is it doesn't matter the size of your company. I mean, we represent very different size companies. We're all actively engaged in ESG in very different ways. And you can be creative, you can be innovative, you can think about what contributes the value back to your organization. Determine what's most important to your business. Do that materiality assessment. And you're looking at, we focused a lot on the stakeholders and what they're asking for. So look at that, look and determine what your stakeholders want, what's important to them, but also look at what's important to your business, because there's many issues out there, hundreds of issues that you could tackle. But if you're a smaller or a middle size and even large companies, you have to make choices. So if you can determine what's most material to your organization and matches to your key imperatives or goals as a company, then you will accelerate a lot faster and you will create that much more value. So that would be my recommendation. It doesn't matter the size. It matters on what issues you're going to tackle and then start that journey.
That's a great point to make, because sometimes we get overwhelmed. We hear all these things and I got to do this, and this, but thinking about what's really material or important to your organization. And, Brian, it sounds like you definitely have thought about that and found ways to make it meaningful for you. So that helps you.
Yeah, I think that's right. I would agree completely with that summary. I think, again, think holistically, leverage relationships, build relationships. And, I think what Lisa's saying is basically create a practical plan for action, right? And I think that's the way to start. It's a life cycle, right? It's a continuum, if you will.
And Alyssa, you've already shared some great ideas about collaborating and things like that. Do you have anything else you want to add? Final parting words of wisdom?
I think I heard when I came on the line from the previous session, people talking about working outside your vertical, outside of the pillar of your work. So this couldn't be more important, right? If you work in procurement, go to your sustainability team if you have one and ask or go to your commercial team and figure out what customers are asking you about, or go to your engineering team and see, and if you're an engineering team, come to procurement, say, hey, I've got this engineering challenge. I don't know how to source X, Y, or Z thing. Share your challenges, share what's worked for you within the company. And it can even be, yes, it can be at 100,000 person company, or it can be at a 30-person company. We all love to work in space that we're comfortable in, and we love to own our space. And when you talk about products, Lisa talked about it, circularity products, you touch every part of the company in that process. Your operations team has to build them. Your distribution team has to send them. Your commercial team has to deal with your customers who are unhappy about the waste of them. Like, every person in your company is touching these issues in some way. So yes, collaborate with suppliers, but also collaborate internally. I think you'll learn a lot about the struggles people are already familiar with, tried to tackle, got stuck, and maybe we can help unstuck each other and get moving in the right direction.
We did have one quick question come in from the audience actually before we go on, and this is actually from the supplier perspective. So any comprehensive tools that you guys know of for small or medium-sized suppliers to kind of get started or on this journey as well? So EcoVadis and CDP are hard to kind of wrap a head around when you're getting started, but any off-the-shelf tools or service providers that can help SMBs navigate this space for customers and stakeholders?
I would look and see what you have internally right now, because there's ERP systems and other large systems that already have modules, and that might be the easiest path. What else, guys?
I mean, I will say, I hear you. This is something we're trying to understand for SMBs in our supply network, because we come up against them quickly, right? Even in our top suppliers, we have some small, medium businesses that are knocking it out of the park, and we're trying to make this doable for them. And your feedback, CDP, totally get it. It's hard. CDP understands it. They're working to make something more flexible for small, medium business on the horizon. If you've not used EcoVadis, I would encourage you to just take a look at your questionnaire. They'll generate it for your company for free based on the size, the number of employees at your company, and your industry vertical. It is sized quite a bit depending on the size of your company. And if you're just trying to get an understanding of what issues are important in a company of your size and in your industry, it's not a terrible return on investment for, I think it's under $1,000. You can get an assessment, see where you are. I don't think anybody's, expecting you to knock it out of the park in performance, but it could help you if you're just trying to get an understanding of like, what issues should I even be going after? In addition to talking to customers, to talking to your other stakeholders, could give you a sense of what others in the marketplace are looking after. And then, there's folks like Lisa and Capaccio and service organizations. There's a lot of small firms that can help you. You can size a project to come in and take an external look and get the external perspective. And I know that, that hurdle of hiring consultant can be tricky, but pretty much everywhere I've worked, we've needed to just have a little support in helping us. We might look around and say, I think this is where we want to be, but we'd love that external perspective. Can be really helpful. And there's so many partners today. You don't have to hire, the big four to help you get started on something like this.
That's awesome. Okay, well, we are right up on time, but just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to you all, Lisa, Alyssa, Brian. Really great session, and really appreciate your support on this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us so far. We do have one more session up, and I see Carlo is on the Zoom. So I'm going to go say, go ahead, get connected, Carlo. It's nice to see you. But before we do switch gears, it's nice to see you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
So just real quickly before we switch gears, just wanted to say another quick thank you to our sponsors at Thermo Fisher Scientific and Capaccio Engineering, who you got to hear from both on that last panel. We couldn't do this without them, and really appreciate their support on this series. So I encourage you to go check out their websites. Obviously, Alyssa and Lisa are excellent resources, and all their team is just absolutely fantastic. So please be sure to go take a look at what they're doing. And I know they'll be able to help you with any questions that you have. Consider them an excellent resource. So we are going to switch gears now to our last session. And I want to say a thank you to Carlo, because Alira is such a wonderful strategic partner of Massmedic. If you don't know Alira Health, I highly encourage you to go look them up right now. They are an outstanding force for good in our industry and a wealth of knowledge. So I cannot say enough wonderful things about our partnership with Alira. And, Carlo, I know we're going to talk a lot about the update to the State of Industry Contract Manufacturing Report, but I wonder if you could maybe give us a little background on how the report kind of started a couple years ago and where it's kind of gone in the last, 2 years.
Absolutely, Rachel. Happy to start there. And it's nice to be here at this meeting again. And my name is Carlos Timamillo. I'm a partner at Alira, and I reside in California, but I spent several years in Boston when I first joined the firm. So still doing a lot of work with Massmedic and the member companies. And
very strong Boston accent you have.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Everybody tells me that. I represent the transaction advisory group of Alira, which is a broker dealer. We support startups and medical technologies that want to be acquired and want to partner with large strategics, which is only one of the many services that Alira help provide. But the hat I'm wearing today is that of researcher in the contract manufacturing space, which for us is a pillar of the work we do in the continuum of healthcare technology. It's a key piece of the whole value chain of delivering innovation to the users, whether they are physicians or patients. And we really believe in this. And regarding the journey of these research and reports, I want to give a lot of credit to Massmedic and thank you guys for really prompting us to generate a founding body of work on measuring trends, doing competitive intelligence, and really understanding what was happening in the outsourcing space in MedTech. And when we started talking with you, Rachel, and Brian a couple of years ago, it was just before the pandemic. The idea was to create some content based on our experience as strategy advisor and bankers on many M&A transactions in this industry, to share insight and sort of shed light on some themes that perhaps were accessible to the experts, and but never really given emphasis or published as a as an encyclopedic body of work to create advocacy for the industry and really share tools and insights for the member companies of Massmedic. I think we achieved those goals. Our joint initiative has been very successful, and it also gave us the opportunity to continue releasing our updates and continue to monitor really what's happening in the market. Our report basically investigates three aspects of what's happening in outsourcing. One is the market performance, and we measured that in terms of specific segments of the value chain of product development and manufacturing, and we'll see that in a little bit, but also end market applications. We look at the performance of technologies and processes in that go into cardiac devices, in vitro diagnostics, surgical technology, and so on and so forth. So we develop analytics in all these segments. The second aspect that we care about is investigating what are the strategic factors that inform the changes to global supply chain in MedTech. And that means for us really looking at the operational aspect of what it takes to what OEMs value when they pick partners, when they set up the procurement value chain for their devices, right? And this delivers a lot of operational insight, and we have a couple of nuggets on that as well. And then the third pool of information that we investigate is the M&A tracker. We monitor investment activity, corporate acquirers, and we try to make sense of this consolidation trend that is happening in the industry and this vibrant investment activity with a lot of capital flowing to this market, and try to make sense of what is the structure of outsourcing, of the outsourcing industry in the next 5 to 10 years, and what is the long game here, and how will that affect small, medium, but also large manufacturers and their customers. So with that, we try to leverage obviously our proprietary research tools, but I also want to thank your member companies and our clients, partners, and friends. I see that Marie is still online, and she was fantastic in giving her her opinions on a couple of our reports. And we really try to give voice to the customers and to the market. And so our database and our insights become more complex and more accurate every year. And we hope to continue doing this great work because it's going to be great for all the stakeholders in this industry. And we're honored to be here to speak about some of our insights now.
That's great. I'm going to turn it over to you for a presentation, but I will say, I think that report is great for stakeholders within industry, but I will tell you, that's one of the most downloaded reports we get from folks who are even adjacent to the industry, right? People who are looking to understand what is going on in life sciences, who aren't directly in life sciences, but they know their businesses are going to be impacted by what's happening in contract manufacturing, all the trends and things that you just talked about. So I think that's incredibly interesting.
Thank you, and hopefully the guests here today will think the same. By the way, I'm going to share here in the chat a link to download the latest version of the report on our website. So everybody who has an interest, feel free to click on this link that I just posted, and you will see the extended version of what I'm about to show you, which is just an excerpt of our latest release. So if this is fine with you, Rachel, I'm going to share my presentation now and get into it. All right, and just for the sake of the audience, I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes walking you through some of the key highlights of what we have represented in our report that was published at the end of March, and reflects the trends that happened in 2021 and offers some predictions for 2022 in terms of market performance and other parameters. Obviously, we're approaching the mid-year, so we continuously receive new input, and I will be able to call out some of these updates during the presentation. So I would like to start, from a view of what happened in the market in the last 3 years. Obviously, we're coming off the pandemic that completely disrupted the procurement cycle for medical devices in 2020 when it all erupted, right, with the cancellation of many elective procedures, health system adapting to the new way of delivering care, but also in that time frame, the problem with logistics and shipment from overseas started to emerge, right, and only aggravated in the last 12 to 18 months. So a big chaos in our ecosystem. 2021 was a rebound year from the lows of the onset of the pandemic. And there was a lot of catching up in the health system to provide care to patients. With entire departments of the hospitals opening up to patients and procedures again. So when I point the performance to this plus 16.8% for the medical device industry, that is reflective of hospital getting back at full regime, but coming off a very flat to negative performance in 2020. So just to give you a historical perspective, the global MedTech markets across the board grow on an average, on a single digit rate of 5 to 6%. So we're expecting, for example, after the big rebound in 2021, 2022 to be back, a reversion to the mean, and leading to a healthy, normal growth of 6% in the year to come. So this hopefully means that from a healthcare point of view, the purchasing patterns and the delivery of procedures and care have gone back to normal. and we really hope that that is going to happen. The outsourced manufacturing component of it follows a slightly different pattern. When we've produced our first industry report before the pandemic in 2020, we were predicting kind of a long-term growth rate of close to 12% per annum. But that prediction did not account for certain challenges that were triggered by the pandemic. Contract manufacturers suffered more than OEMs at the beginning of COVID, and the rebound of the for outsourced manufacturers was less than the OEM performance in 2021. The market grew at 12.9% in 2021, and while that seems close enough to what the normal trajectory for the industry seemed to be, according to a pre-pandemic estimate, it is really the effect of many positive and negatives, affecting the procurement of medical devices and particular segment specifically. I think that the divide between the growth of OEMs and CDMOs will be even more clear in 2021, where contract manufacturers will likely experience an average performance of close to 16% versus an end market growth of 6%. How is this divide justified? And well, there are several factors. First of all, there's a catch-up effect. Procurement decision affect our long-term levers for the OEM's procurement strategy. So whatever was decided, in the last couple of years will come to fruition in 2022 in terms of go-to-market of new products or changes to their outsourcing policies or their purchasing pattern. So US CDMO market will continue to outperform the OEMs, thanks to this time lag effect, but also because we believe that now that the pandemic is kind of subsiding or is more under control from a supply chain point of view, there will be a continuation of a long-term tendency for medical device manufacturers to outsource more and more pieces of their procurement. A quick look at where the growth of the OEM of the end medical device end markets happened last year. It was really across the board. If you see a lot of the top performers were in the space of surgical devices across indications, because a lot of these procedures were delayed from the year prior, and so there was a large backlog of procedures to be delivered to patients. A special mention goes to the in vitro diagnostic sector. Of course, the advent of COVID created a huge need for testing and management of the infections of the disease. This gave a boost to device and diagnostic manufacturers for the last couple of years, but we think that this is a trend that is here to stay, probably not a fluke. Even though COVID may disappear or may slowly subside, or maybe will persist in an endemic fashion, will force us to continue to control the disease. Definitely the attention of health system, but society in general, towards the problem of infection control and prevention creates a steady demand that is here to stay, and is probably something that did not exist to this degree before the pandemic. And this is good news for the manufacturers, of course, because it will create a consistent ecosystem demand of services. Sectors like respiratory care or medical imaging that had experienced a very strong boost at the onset of the pandemic, particularly the sector of ventilator. We all remember, reading articles about a deficit of ventilator in US hospital, and the quest for manufacturing ventilators in large quantities. Well, the system probably is saturated its capacity at this point, and so this was an outlier in a negative form during 2021. What can we expect in the transition from a very strong year into 2022, and what are we seeing? Well, last year was a record year. This rebound and this great performance of hospital demand, the emergence of procedures for to control and treat and diagnose COVID, where generated a peak of demand, and the return of elective procedures did the rest, right? That combined with low interest rate and unprecedented capital availability to both corporate players as well as innovative startups by ways of venture money available to the innovation community. This created a lot of opportunities, and 2021 was a record year, reflecting these positive trends. Entering into 2021, and a normalized performance of the OEM market, and a slowdown of the financial conditions, both in terms of rising interest rates, declining stock markets, and so on and so forth, may create some may restrict the overall opportunity set, but capital availability remains very strong and sustaining innovative projects, and will continue to feed volume of business for contract development and manufacturing organizations. So this reflects on the projection for a near 16% increase in the CDMO US market for this year. A couple of factors that I want to point to are kind of a return to the norm regarding the OEM's long-term procurement strategies. I mentioned earlier this tendency of leveraging more outsourcing partners for a larger portion of the procurement value chain. During COVID, and still nowadays, in the thick of the supply chain crisis, it's been very hard for OEMs to implement long-term cost-cutting or risk-based approaches to partner management, and let alone to develop long-term plans for outsourcing of significant portions of their operations. Why? Because they've been on a crisis management mode, and now hopefully with the crisis subsiding, these limitations will cease, and we'll see again a strong effort to deleverage the in-house operations and give more business out to CDMOs. And this is something that we believe is a secular trend that is here to stay. But unfortunately, in the last couple of years, this has not been very easy to track because of all the challenges that have impacted global supply chains. The other factor that is strictly related to the challenges in supply chain management is that to guarantee the flow of products to the hospitals and to users, OEMs have already started to increase their inventory levels. And until some of the bottlenecks in global supply chain are resolved, this pattern of over purchasing will continue to stay. And this is a good opportunity for CDMOs that will see their backlog to reach record levels versus historical average in 2022. We see this talking to all our clients and partners and friends, the predictability of revenue and the reliability of purchasing orders is very high at this point compared to historical levels. Our analysis has tried to shed light on where is the growth happening, and are there some type of outsourced capabilities that are performing better than others? Well, the answer is no. It's very hard to differentiate where the flow towards outsourcing is really happening. The performance both last year and in 2022 happened across the board, and there's only anecdotal insights that kind of differentiate the different types of services. For example, product development is really driven by the availability of funding to early stage innovation, right? Whether it comes from venture-backed startups or from established corporate players. Component manufacturing and assembly are really stages of the supply chain, of the value chain, that are exposed to overseas competition, and certainly a factor that has been affecting this subset of the CDMO industry is a trend of onshoring and of bringing certain parts of the manufacturing process to the US, back to the US, or to accessible nearshore locations like Mexico or the Caribbean region. Packaging and labeling has happens near market. It's a segment that suffered some setbacks due to quality issues of some large sterilization providers last year that created opportunities for smaller manufacturers, particularly active in supply chain management, to try to expedite and resolve those bottlenecks. So this is also an area of services that we see that has strong tailwinds. And so the summary is, there are different forces in action here, and they will all spur growth across the board. It will be interesting to see over time how the different pieces of the value chain will balance out, and how the normalized long-term growth will do. Part of our research also focused on understanding what is the structure of US outsourcing, and this is a database that only tracks manufacturers with larger than $5 million in revenue. So there is a kind of tail of our industry that is not represented here, but essentially by virtue of industry consolidation and M&A activity, we're seeing a growing relative weight of mid-size manufacturers between $100 and $500,000 in revenue. It seemed like smaller, and intuitively so, that the smaller manufacturers are increasingly targeted by M&A acquirers. And at the same time, the larger, let's say, $500 million plus manufacturer and billion-dollar plus CDMOs are capturing relatively less of the market growth, so losing their market share relatively to the mid-sized player, who usually are more agile or provide a good level of specialization and economies of scope, while still providing a suite of services and a certain degree of one-stop shopping experience to their customer, therefore leveraging a competitive advantage. This is a very fascinating aspect of our research, and I'm happy to take questions in a few minutes. We've spoken about what are the big trends, driving the demand and the expected positive performance for the industry this year and beyond. So I don't want to linger here too long. I want to emphasize some of the risk factors, though. In an industry that grows on average 12% or plus a year, there may be a false sense of complacency. We who work in this space know how hard it is to do our job and to manage a supply chain. And so it's important, that we keep tabs on these risk factors, and that will determine eventually who will succeed and will remain, a market leader leading the industry consolidation, and the players that will lose market share and eventually may be forced to either, be acquired or to be pushed out of the market. The panel earlier on elaborated very eloquently on the issue of global supply chain crisis, and I have a slide on a couple of takeaways there. Industry consolidation, definitely, the fact that the average size of MedTech CDMO is increasing creates some competitive pressure on the smaller players that are, do not offer a differentiated or technology-based competencies to their customers. And then, a return of the OEMs to negotiate on prices. Once the crisis is over and the cost of raw material, inflation aside, are under control, they will continue to pressure their outsourcing partners to deliver quality at decreasing cost, and so only the players that have that ability to make their cost structure more efficient will eventually succeed. But this is something that we have not really seen in the last couple of years because of all the crises that have characterized global supply chains. I don't want to linger too long on the topic of supply chain crisis. We do have a view that the crisis will generate opportunities for the domestic CDMO industry. Definitely driving volumes back to the US or to our neighbor countries, volume that may have been farmed out to China or other Asian countries in the pursuit of cost advantages, to increase the reliability of the supplies, shorten the lead times, and have more control on shipping costs. This is something natural to predict, and that we are already seeing in 2022 happening, thanks to the insight shared by our clients and our survey partners. We also want to imagine a better future from a structure of the medical device supply chain, where a future where there is more space for automation and lean manufacturing and integration of market data between OEMs and CDMOs. So how close are we to that future? And it's hard to say, but we think that the CDMOs that are better positioned to provide agility and those and facilitate the transition of OEM to smarter ways to manage their supply chain will definitely benefit and hopefully act as role model for the entire industry. So this may be a very long-term trend, but we believe that we can get out of this supply chain crisis, having more control on the flow of raw materials, and most importantly, having predictability and restoring the reliability of the supply chain of the life-saving technologies, which right now is causing a strain on the P&L of OEMs and CDMOs alike. Another kind of red flag that kind of exploded last year is the competitiveness in the labor market, and something that applies across the board to highly technical, highly qualified jobs, but also to line workers and really any function across the board of the U.S. economy. But it hit particularly hard medical device manufacturing, and this is something we want to mention because from the perspective of Massachusetts as one of the global hubs for MedTech innovation and manufacturing, we want to pose the problem of how do you make sure that you can recruit and retain the talent to support the growth of the industry, right? When there are other industries like biotech or information technology that are willing to pay a multiple of the salaries to highly qualified engineers and so forth. And also we want to pose the problem of competition from other regional hubs that perhaps in the past were kind of second tier, but still have access to good talent at a fraction of the cost. So, when we talk about onshoring of capacity and onshoring of talent, we need to think strategically, where do we set up shop in the US, and to make sure that we can grow our services and our business and maintain quality people. This is something that remains to be seen, and we definitely want to continue investigating this topic. And I will close very briefly with a few nuggets and a few comments on the M&A market. MedTech CDMOs are not a secret story anymore. For over a decade, dozens of financial investors have deployed capital to the industry, creating fast-growing platforms and acting as accelerator of the industry consolidation. This process culminated in 2021 with a record number of M&A transactions of 52, majority of which driven by private equity-backed organization, but still seeing a high participation of corporate acquirers. And the appetite for capacity and for consolidation is as high as ever. A lot of these platforms are recently formed. That means that there is a lot of capital availability still there to continue pushing the M&A market and creating larger, more efficient players. So for the entrepreneurs out there, you can continue to expect a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails from interested acquirers and brokers that want to buy your business. Anecdotally, in 2022, we are experiencing to date a slowdown of this record activity. There's, part of it is explained by the dynamic of the cycle. After a record year, there may be, the market and players may be catching a breath, so to speak. To be determined how the financial performance, public companies and the increase of interest rates is going to impact the valuation and the availability of debt to complete acquisition. And we can expect somehow the cycle to contract and to reduce the dry powder. So while we think that the fundamentals of industry consolidation are very strong in the medium term, there are some, signs of slowdown in this frenzy of the M&A market. Last year was a record year for private equity exits that sort of set the mark, the passage into a new generation of financial sponsor, which is what I alluded to a minute ago, the large availability of dry powder. And in our report, we also reference for the most technical readers, what are the average valuation parameters for a CDMO business that we have seen in 2021, in line or even exceeding the recent years valuation parameters, both in terms of multiple of profitability and multiple of revenue. But we do expect somehow these parameters to plateau in 2022 and to calm down and give more opportunities for to select the good versus the bad assets. I think I exceeded my intention to keep it under 30 minutes, but I should be more or less on time. I'm on minute 31 of my presentation. So I would take an opportunity just to summarize how we view the market to continue in 2022 and beyond. Slowing down M&A activity, but continuing to to remain sustained, but not quite to the degree of 2021. Private equity interest continuing, but more interested in selecting highly differentiated, strong, technology-driven manufacturers from those more focused on commodity products, and some stickiness in the valuation, but that we think will not continue to increase, but rather stick within what we have experienced in the last couple of years in terms of profitability or revenue multiples. So I will close my presentation with a general comment about the good health of the industry that navigated and is navigating an unprecedented crisis. Started off with the pandemic and now really entangled with the global slowdown of supply chain and rising raw material costs, but that continues to be driven by a secular trend in outsourcing demand, and will continue to thrive, supported by large availability of capital and sound fundamentals driving industry consolidation. I leave you here on this slide just because you have my contact information, and as we transition into the Q&A part of our of this discussion, I invite everyone who is interested to be in touch with me or the team for further conversation offline.
Thanks, Carla. That was awesome. Don't worry about going over time. We always have plenty of time. So I encourage people, pop your questions in the Q&A. So some things that kind of jumped to mind for me, and I was taking notes as you were kind of going through this. Obviously, consolidation across the CDMO industry is the potential for some risk, right? If there are now less sources available, then that seems even more risky for the ecosystem.
Yeah, let me just, as a consultant, I like to have a slide in the background. Well, industry consolidation means different things. It means larger, more efficient suppliers that can be more focused on delivering quality and monitoring product quality. Also, it means economies of scale, so cost advantages. So there are a lot of positive, positive outcomes that may be generated from industry consolidation. Also, ultimately, this does not necessarily mean a reduction of of sources of product or materials. In fact, we think that as mid to large size CDMOs become more successful, they have access to secondary sourcing and opportunities to establish capacity and operations in nearshore market where the quality control is still very strong, and there's the access to product is positive vis-a-vis what we may imagine kind of the opposite at the other end of the spectrum. Importing goods from Asia, right, from China, means today with these bottlenecks in the global shipping industry, right? So overall, there are a lot of positive economic benefits that may derive from consolidation, but also from a risk management point of view, as you pointed.
So it also, on the positive spin on things, I like that. It also seems like there might be really opportunities for innovation then. If the industry is used to things being done a certain way and in a certain capacity, things have been completely turned on their heads in the past year, both when it comes to the capabilities. Apologize, COVID's catching up to me. But both when it comes to the component side of things, but also to the labor force. So it seems like there's some real ripe opportunity for innovation in those spaces.
Absolutely. And I switch back to this slide that shows what is the ideal kind of value chain of medical technology, right? From product development. So when the product is designed and engineered, and then, the components are sourced, and then the device is put together, and then is packaged, sterilized, and sent off to the hospital, right? So for sure, innovation in terms of new product design and component manufacturing is happening at a very high rate, and OEMs do not necessarily want to focus on this anymore, but they're increasingly outsourcing it to specialized manufacturer or engineering firms, right? And these agility to tackle technical problems and implement them into the supply chain of the product is definitely beneficial for the delivery of innovation to patients and users. So we also see that correlation of increased outsourcing, faster time to market of innovation.
So the other thing that struck me when you were going through the presentation is your comment about automation. So one of the things I think we've talked about with a lot of our members is understanding where automation makes sense from a manufacturing and labor perspective. But then as we understand what jobs can be replaced with automation, how to then keep those skilled workers in a position that is going to benefit the organization as a whole. So I'm wondering what you think about automation and manufacturing, and kind of where you think there might be some trends or opportunities there.
Absolutely. So automation, is it definitely applies to different types of products in different ways. There are products, there are types of technology or components that are more prone to be, manufactured or assembled in automated lines than others. Borrowing from the pharmaceutical industry, definitely, those applications that require very high volume of parts are the most prone, and definitely the low-hanging fruit. So it's hard to make a general assessment. The truth of the matter is, as an industry, medical devices rely to a relatively low level of automation compared to other industries. There's, if you draw a curve, between, that shows kind of volume of procedures and value, you obviously place MedTech in high value products, but relatively lower volume. I think the other aspect of automation in the manufacturing line is kind of secondary to the way OEMs design their supply chain and their procurement cycle. I think the first step is going to be moving from an opportunistic kind of near-term, inventory, a building approach to a more of a lean manufacturing approach, which we know, also because our industry's value chain is so global and fragmented, is not really easy to implement. So I really think the philosophy towards leaner, more efficient type of procurement is the first step, and that will enable to introduce automation at a specific manufacturing line level. The high volume products and devices being definitely the first adopters of automation, as we already see in many cases, right there, especially in the IVD and kind of drug delivery systems. There's a high level of automation because the level of quality in handling chemicals and reagents needs to be kind of pharmaceutical grade, right? Just to give an example.
No, I love that. I think you're absolutely right. I think what you just said was completely spot on about understanding the longer term picture, right? There's the smaller, small opportunistic kind of ways to implement automation, but I think you're absolutely right about taking a big picture approach. And that's something that the industry really needs to be thinking about moving forward. So we do have a couple questions from the audience. So I will just read those off for you. So Carlo, you mentioned strong sterilization tailwinds and bottlenecks being addressed by smaller players. What is your take on the situation in Europe and regulation versus in the US, and states implementing harsh taxation for certain sterilization uses?
So I don't have specific data on Europe versus US so I'll stay away from that part of the question. Sterilization suffered some setbacks last year with some notorious issues, some large providers of sterilization. And so creating some bottlenecks to the release of products. The opportunities that we see for smaller players is to take in their hands the sterilization management aspect. So taking it off the hands of the OEM customer leveraging their economies of scale to kind of pressure the Sterices and the Sterigenics of the world to bundle and deliver product more promptly. But there's also a move, and this is a fairly recent trend that we have, that we're tracking, which is the move from towards pre-sterilized packaging. So moving, for certain categories of products, moving the sterilization, the operations and packaging from these big sterilization center to the near contract manufacturing sites or in-house by the manufacturers. So this is a big trend and is going to basically open opportunities for manufacturers to have their products sterilized and packaged by their CDMO, and therefore reducing the lead time. So these are some of the trends that I was alluding to earlier. Unfortunately, I do not have a vision on the European side of things, but it's a great question, and something that maybe we can expand on next time.
That sounds great. Okay, one last question. In your surveying, have you done any analysis on projections of the recessionary impacts in the last half of 2022 into 23?
Thanks, Brandon, for this question. We do not have data. We plan to get some insight in the second half of 2022, but kind of the directional data that we see is that the strong, the pursuit of higher inventory levels and sort of the catching up on the supply chain side for parts and raw materials more than offsets potential a potential view on recession and slowdown of the economy and cuts to the hospital budget. So we do not think that if we go into a recession, it will have a very strong impact, certainly in 2022, and perhaps on 2023 as well. So our view is quite flat on 2023, and we'll continue to see growth. And we don't have a strong view, honestly, on what's the impact of a potential recession as a whole. We'll definitely get more data in the second part of this year, and as we kind of update our estimates for 2023.
Awesome, thank you. So I think that was the last question we had from the audience. So I guess with that, I'm just going to say, Carlo, thank you so much. I think this is an outstanding overview of the report, and we're so thrilled to have had you share it with us. Make sure, everyone, if you are interested in the report, there is a link in the chat so you can download that. And I highly encourage you to reach out to Carlo and his team. Alira has been doing such wonderful work on these reports, and they, like I said, have an incredible amount of information behind them. So you're definitely going to want to not only download it, but to reach out to Carlo.
And I love my time here today. Thanks to all for the interesting questions. And again, if you wish to discuss further, my contact information is here. And I hope to see you next year.
Thank you so much, Carlo. And thank you to all of us for hanging in there for a few hours. Quick last thank you to Thermo Fisher Scientific and Capaccio Environmental Engineering for sponsoring and hosting this program with us, and to all of our wonderful speakers. We really appreciate your input, and to all of you for joining us. So everyone, I will say have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.